The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on Dry Creek, turning the air into a shimmering haze of dust and heat. Even the hard-packed earth of the town square seemed to radiate waves of exhaustion. But today, there was no quiet lull of routine business. No idle chatter about cattle prices or the weather. No, today, the entire town had gathered for something darker, something they all pretended was justice but felt more like spectacle. The square, if you could call the trampled stretch of ground between the general store and the saloon a square, was more crowded than Clara Whitford had ever seen it. Men stood in tight clusters, sweat staining their leather chaps and wide-brimmed hats. Their voices rose and fell like the hum of angry bees, rough laughter breaking through now and then. Women lingered at the edges of the crowd, skirts brushing the dirt, their children clinging nervously to their hands. Some of them wore looks of curiosity, others of discomfort. But none left. No one wanted to miss what was about to unfold. At the center of it all stood Sheriff McKenna. His badge caught the harsh light, gleaming like a coin on his chest. He wore that same self-important scowl Clara knew all too well, a look that always made him seem less like a man upholding the law and more like a circus master about to unveil his latest attraction. And standing beside him, chained like a dangerous animal, was the reason for all this noise. The man was taller than anyone else in the square. His shoulders broad, his posture straight, his skin bronzed deep by both sun and bloodline. A mane of dark hair fell loosely past his shoulders. Iron shackles clamped cruelly around his wrists and ankles, the metal already carving angry welts into his flesh. Yet even bound, he carried himself with an unshakable dignity that no chain could diminish. His head remained high, his gaze sweeping calmly over the hostile faces that surrounded him. A ripple of unease seemed to pass through the crowd. Clara noticed it. She always noticed things others tried to hide. He did not cower. He did not spit or snarl like they half expected. Instead, his silence, his composure, it unsettled them more than any show of rage could have. "Step right up, folks," Sheriff McKenna called, his voice booming across the square with a mix of authority and showmanship. "Got ourselves a genuine wild one here. Caught him red-handed, stealing horses from the Mack Ranch. Judge says he's to be sold to cover damages." A murmur ran through the crowd, low and sharp. "Savage," someone spat. "Beast," another hissed. The insults flew like stones, but the man in chains did not flinch. His dark eyes remained steady, watching them all with a kind of quiet judgment that made Clara's heart twist. $50 to start," McKenna barked. "Who'll give me 50 for this strong back? Put him to work in the mines or breaking horses. Lord knows these savages are good with animals." Laughter rippled across the crowd, cruel and careless. But then, just as the sheriff prepared to push harder, a voice rang out, cutting through the heat-thick air like a gunshot. "Don't hurt him." The crowd went still. Every head turned. And through the wall of bodies stepped Clara Whitford. Her faded brown dress was plain, worn from too many washings, but there was nothing plain about her eyes. They were green-sharp, alive, and in them burned a fire that made even the roughest of men step aside. Her auburn hair, usually tucked neatly into a bun, glowed like copper in the sunlight. To most in Dry Creek, she was known simply as the Widow Whitford, the stubborn woman who lived alone on a failing ranch at the edge of town. Too proud to remarry, too determined to sell out and leave. But today, Clara Whitford was something more. "I'll buy him," she declared, her voice steady, though her hands trembled at her sides. For a moment, there was only silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. McKenna's mustache twitched in amusement. "Now, Mrs. Whitford, this ain't no church charity. This here's a dangerous," I said. "I'll buy him," she cut in. She pulled a small cloth bundle from her leather purse. Coins clinked as she lifted it high for all to see. $70. Everything I have. The reaction was immediate. Clara, have you lost your mind? Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, gasped, clutching her pearls like they could shield her from scandal. You can't bring that creature onto your land. Someone else shouted. He's a thief. A savage. But Clara's jaw was set like granite. Her eyes never wavered from the chained man's face. Call him savage all you want, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the square. I see a man worth saving. For the first time, something flickered in the prisoner's dark eyes. Surprise? Maybe. Or maybe it was something deeper, something long buried beneath years of cruelty. Sheriff McKenna shifted uncomfortably. He had expected a fight, not this. Mrs. Whitford, I got a responsibility to this town, and you have a responsibility to the law, Clara snapped. The judge said he was to be sold. I'm buying. Unless you're telling me my money's no good, because I'm a woman. That stung. The crowd erupted in whispers, watching to see if McKenna would dare cross that line. Even he wasn't fool enough to argue openly with the letter of the law. Fine, he growled, snatching the bundle from her hand. He counted each coin with exaggerated slowness, as if hoping she'd come up short. When the tally came up exact, his scowl deepened. Bill of sale will be at my office. You can collect it and him in an hour. I'll take him now. Clara's voice was firm. Now, see here. I've paid for him, she pressed on. He's my property now, as you so crudely put it. I'll take him now. Or you can explain to Judge Harrison why you held on to him after the sale was complete. The threat of the circuit judge known for his strict interpretation of the law was enough to silence McKenna. With visible reluctance, he produced a key and bent to unlock the shackles at the prisoner's ankles. Though he left the wrists bound, Clara's gaze softened slightly as she looked at the man. Come with me, she said gently. For a long moment, he just studied her, as if trying to unravel a puzzle. Then, with a dignity that made the jeers of the crowd seem even more shameful, he inclined his head and stepped forward. The crowd parted reluctantly, their faces twisted with shock and outrage. Clara felt their eyes burning into her back, their judgment heavy as stone. You'll regret this. Clara, Mrs. Patterson called after her. The only thing I'd regret, Clara shot back, loud enough for all to hear, is standing by while you treat a human being like livestock. Gasps, mutters, curses followed them, but Clara didn't turn back. She kept her chin high, leading the man through the hostile sea of faces. And though her stomach churned with nerves, her heart beat with something she hadn't felt in years purpose. For 3 long years, she had carried the grief of her husband's death like a yoke around her neck. For 3 long years, she had fought to keep her ranch afloat, alone and judged by all. But in this moment, with this man walking beside her despite the chains still biting his wrists, Clara knew something had shifted. Maybe she couldn't save her husband. Maybe she couldn't save the ranch from failure. But this man, this human being the town, dismissed as a savage him, she could save. And just maybe, though she didn't dare admit it yet, he might save her too. The sheriff's office smelled of ink, stale tobacco, and the faint tang of sweat. It was a squat little building, half jail, half administrative hub, and Clara had always disliked stepping inside it. But now, with the man she had just purchased trailing behind her in chains, the space felt even more suffocating. McKenna sat at his desk, scratching out the bill of sale with an exaggerated sigh, like each stroke of the pen was a personal insult. His mustache twitched as his eyes flicked between Clara and the chained man. You sure about this, Mrs. Whitford? He asked finally. Ain't too late to change your mind. I could find another buyer, someone better equipped to handle. His words trailed off into suggestion. Just write the bill, Sheriff. Clara's tone left no room for argument. He grumbled under his breath, but finished the document. stamping it with unnecessary force. "There. May the Lord help you, because you sure ain't helping yourself." Clara stepped forward, snatched up the paper, and folded it with care. "The keys, Sheriff." With a scowl, McKenna tossed her the key to the wrist shackles. "Don't come crying to me when he slits your throat in your sleep." Clara's eyes flashed. "The only throat cut in this town lately was by Bob Harmon when he was drunk, and he's as white as cotton." "Good day, Sheriff." She didn't wait for his reply. She turned on her heel, her purchased man following close behind, his steps silent but powerful. Outside, the sun still blazed hot, but Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. She stopped on the wooden walkway and turned to him, holding up the key. "I'm going to unlock these," she said. "I don't expect you'll run." "Where would you go?" "But I won't keep you in chains like an animal." For a moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he extended his wrists. Clara slipped the key into the lock. With a rusty groan, the shackles fell away, clattering against the planks with a sound that seemed to echo down the entire street. He rubbed at his raw wrists, the skin marked with red welts and scabs. The gesture was simple, but to Clara, it was the first truly human thing she had seen him do since this ordeal began. "We'll tend to those wounds," she said softly. "I've got salve at the ranch." She hesitated, then added, "It's about an hour's ride." "Can you manage?" For the first time, something close to a smile touched his lips. He gave a single, steady nod. "Good." Clara pointed toward the livery stable. "This way." As they walked, Clara felt the eyes of Dry Creek upon them. Every window, every doorway seemed filled with people watching. Their gazes weren't curious anymore. They were condemning. Whispers followed in their wake, sharp as needles. Widows lost her mind. Should get herself killed. Can't tame a savage. But Clara ignored them all. She had lived under their judgment for years already. Today, she had chosen a different burden, one she'd rather carry than the weight of doing nothing. The livery stable smelled of hay, sweat, and horsehide. Clara borrowed her usual moray from Mr. Peterson, who stared at the tall man warily but said nothing. Money was money, and Clara always paid her bills. The prisoner, no. Not prisoner. Not any more moved with ease as he mounted the borrowed horse. Despite his injuries, he sat the animal as if born to the saddle, his back straight, his balance sure. Clara noted the way he adjusted his weight subtly, favoring his left side. An injury, perhaps. They rode out of town in silence, the clop of hooves on packed earth their only music. For the first mile, Clara tried not to look at him, but she couldn't help stealing glances. His face was strong, weathered by sun and hardship, but not cruel. His jaw was sharp, his eyes dark and watchful. He carried himself with a quiet dignity that made Clara ache with both admiration and sorrow. When the valley opened before them, she pointed toward the line of cottonwoods in the distance. "We'll stop by the creek. Let the horses drink." He nodded Dot at the water's edge. Clara dismounted, leading her Mari to drink. The man followed, but instead of using the tin cup tied to his saddle, he crouched low and cupped the water in both hands, lifting it to his lips with a reverence that caught Clara off guard. It wasn't just thirst he was quenching. It was something deeper, almost spiritual. Water dripped from his fingers, running down his arms as he drank again, then sat back on his heels. When he lifted his gaze, he found Clara watching him. For a long heartbeat, neither of them looked away. "The water's good here," Clara said finally, her voice softer than she intended. "Fed by snow from the mountains." He studied her, then surprised her by speaking. His voice was low, rough from disuse, but his English was clear. "Water knows. Clean heart, clean water." It was the first full sentence she had heard him speak. Clara blinked, stunned. "You speak English well." A shadow crossed his face. "Mission school. he said flatly. Then, after a pause, he added with quiet bitterness, "They say make us civilized." The pain in those few words pressed on Clara's chest like a stone. She wanted to offer comfort, but any attempt at pity would ring hollow. Instead, she asked, "What should I call you?" "I don't even know your name." He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, slowly, he touched his chest. "Samuel," he said. "They give me Samuel. Admission. But my people Tall Bear." "Samuel Tall Bear," Clara repeated softly. The name felt weighty on her tongue, filled with strength and history. He studied her with those piercing eyes. "You are not afraid." Clara considered her words carefully. "Should I be?" "Others fear," he said simply. "Always fear. They see savage." He gestured back toward town. Then his hand moved toward her. "You see?" "Man." "Yes," Clara said firmly. "I see a man." For the first time, his expression softened. A flicker of something relief, perhaps even trust passed across his face. Then he shifted slightly, and Clara saw him wince. "You're hurt," she said sharply. "Show me." He hesitated, then pulled aside his torn shirt. Clara gasped before she could stop herself. His ribs were mottled with bruises, purple and green, layered with scars old and new. A map of violence etched into his skin. Who did this? She demanded, though she already knew the answer. "Does not matter," he said, pulling the fabric back over himself. "Is done. It matters to me," Clara snapped. He looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Strange woman," he murmured. "Buy man like horse. Worry for his pain." "I didn't buy a man," Clara replied firmly. "I bought your freedom." "There's a difference." His gaze lingered on her for a long moment before he gave the smallest of nods. Then, without another word, he mounted his horse once more. Clara followed, her heart racing by the time they crested the final hill. The ranch lay spread before them. Clara's heart tightened at the sight. Even bathed in the golden glow of late afternoon, the flaws were plain. The house leaned slightly to one side, its boards weathered gray by sun and storm. Fences sagged drunkenly, gaps wide enough for livestock she no longer owned to slip through. The barn roof was patched with mismatched shingles, the garden choked with weeds. She glanced at Samuel, bracing for judgment. But his expression remained steady, unreadable. After a long moment, he nodded once. "Good bones," he said simply. "Land wants to live. Needs care." Clara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It wasn't always like this," she heard herself say, then immediately regretted the confession. What did it matter what he thought? Still, the words hung between them as they rode down to the house. Inside, the place was clean but sparse. A wood stove. A table with 2 chairs. Shelves lined with a meager collection of preserves. And above the fireplace, a single photograph in a tarnished frame Jacob Whitford, frozen in time, smiling with a confidence that still cut Clara to her core. "You can sleep in the barn," she told Samuel, avoiding his eyes. "There's fresh hay in the loft and blankets in the trunk by the door. I'll bring supper out when it's ready." He stood silently for a moment, his gaze lingering on the photograph of Jacob. Then he inclined his head slightly and moved toward the door. Just before he stepped outside, he paused. His lips moved carefully, as if remembering how to shape the words. "Thank you," he said, his voice deep and rusty. Clara's breath caught. It was the first time he had spoken to her willingly. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with the sound of her own heartbeat hammering in her chest. That night, Clara carried a tray of beans, cornbread, and preserved peaches to the barn. She found Samuel seated on a bale of hay, working with his hands. As she approached, she saw he was mending a broken buckle from a harness with quiet skill. "You don't have to," she began. He looked up at her, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Clara stopped, startled. Was that humor? She set the tray down beside him. Well, she said, regaining her composure, I suppose there's plenty around here that needs fixing. They ate in companionable silence. The barn cats crept from the shadows, sniffing curiously at the stranger. One bold tabby rubbed against his leg, and Clara watched, astonished, as Samuel reached down and stroked the cat's head with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the scars on his body. Later, lying awake in her bed, Clara listened to the familiar creaks of the old house. But beneath them was something new, the quiet knowledge that she was no longer alone. Everyone in town expected her to be afraid. Maybe she should have been. But what she felt instead was harder to name. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the possibility of it. Morning sunlight spilled across the ranch, chasing shadows from the fields. Clara stood at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, trying to shape her swirling thoughts into a list of tasks. Everything seemed urgent. The roof leaked in 3 places. The well pump needed new leather washers. The chicken coop had a hole that let in foxes. The garden fence sagged, useless against rabbits. And beneath it all loomed the greatest problem of all, money. She didn't have any. Her hand trembled as she set the pencil down. Even if she managed to fix one thing, something else would fall apart. She pressed her palm to her eyes, willing herself not to cry. A soft knock interrupted her. Clara looked up to see Samuel standing on the porch. His hair was tied back, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He wore the same clothes from yesterday, but there was something steadier about him, as if the shackles had weighed down more than his wrists. He pointed toward the barn, then at himself, and made a swinging motion with his hand, mimicking a hammer. You want to work? Clara asked, surprised. Dottie nodded. I can't pay you, she said quickly. I spent everything I had just to. She caught herself, heat rushing to her face. Food and shelter, that's all I can offer. Samuel lifted his hands, palms open, showing the raw welts where shackles had bitten deep. Then he pointed toward the house, then to her, and gave another small nod. Clara swallowed hard. The message was clear. She had bought his freedom. That was payment enough. Well then, she managed, blinking against sudden tears. We'd better get started. She led him to the tool shed. Jacob's tools still hung where he'd left them 3 years ago, gathering dust and rust. Samuel examined each one carefully, testing edges and joints, setting aside those that needed repair. When he found Jacob's whetstone, he looked at Clara for permission. Yes, she said quickly. Of course. Use whatever you need. The words came out choked. The memory of Jacob's hands on those same tools rising UNBIDDEN by midday, the rhythmic sound of hammer on wood, filled the air. Samuel had chosen to start with the fence, and Clara found herself watching more than working. He moved with quiet efficiency, muscles bunching beneath bronze skin as he drove posts into the earth. His every motion was purposeful, controlled, almost graceful. When she brought him water, he drank deeply, then surprised her by speaking. Good tools, he said, nodding toward the shed. Your man? New iron. Clara managed to smile. Jacob was particular about his tools. Said a man was only as good as what he worked with. Samuel considered that, then nodded approvingly. Wise. It was the longest exchange they'd had, and Clara carried his words with her like a precious token as she returned to her chores. That evening, Clara insisted he join her at the kitchen table for supper. She set out beans, bread, and what remained of last year's preserves. Samuel ate with quiet dignity, savoring each bite. Clara found herself talking more than she intended. About Jacob, about the ranch, about her family back east, who had begged her to return after the funeral. They couldn't understand, she said. staring down at her plate. This was Jacob's dream. Mine too. We were going to raise horses, build something that would last. Her voice cracked. Instead, I've watched it fall apart piece by piece. The bank owns more of it than I do now. Samuel listened without interruption, his dark eyes steady on hers. When she finally ran out of words, he rose and moved to the window, gazing out at the darkening land. After a long silence, he spoke. "Land remembers," he said slowly. "Bad times, good times. But land waits. For hands that know. For hearts that stay." Clara's throat tightened. It was the longest speech he had given her, and it carried a wisdom she hadn't expected. Days bled into weeks. A rhythm emerged between them. Samuel rose with the dawn, working until sunset, mending fences, shoring up the barn, fixing the well. Clara kept house, tended the chickens and garden, and found herself planning beyond the next meal for the first time in years. In the evenings, they shared meals. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes not. Samuel's words were few, but each one seemed to carry the weight of thought. Clara found herself listening, not just with her ears, but with her heart. One afternoon, while repairing the well pump, water suddenly gushed forth, clear and strong. Samuel's face broke into a real smile, broad, genuine, transforming his weathered features. "Samuel," he said, pointing to himself. "Samuel Tallbear." Clara repeated it softly. "Samuel." His smile widened at the sound of his name spoken kindly, but Dry Creek was not a place where kindness came easy. When Clara went to Bradley's store for supplies, conversations hushed. Women she'd known for years turned their backs. Only young Tom Bradley met her eyes, slipping extra apples into her basket when his father wasn't looking. "They're saying things," Tom whispered one day, glancing around nervously. "Ugly things about you and him. Some of the men, they're talking about riding out to your place, making sure you're safe." The implication was clear. Clara's chin lifted. "You tell those men I'm safer now than I've been in 3 years. And if they set foot on my land without invitation, they'll meet Jacob's shotgun." But that night, she did retrieve the shotgun from above the mantel, cleaning and loading it with hands that shook only slightly. When Samuel saw it leaning by the door the next morning, he nodded gravely. He understood. The first test came sooner than Clara expected. She was in the garden when she heard horses 3, maybe 4 approaching. She straightened, hoe in hand, as Dale Morrison, owner of the valley's largest ranch, reined in at her gate. Beside him rode the Harmon brothers, both mean drunks, and Sheriff McKenna, looking distinctly uncomfortable. "We've come to check on your welfare," Morrison said, his tone oily. "As you can see, Mr. Morrison, I'm perfectly well." Clara's voice was steady, though her pulse raced. Morrison dismounted, his hand resting casually on his pistol. "Can't blame folks for being concerned. A woman alone with a savage. His name is Samuel," Clara snapped. "And I'm not alone, as you've just pointed out." Morrison's face darkened. "You've taken leave of your senses. I'll take him off your hands and give you a fair price for this land. You could go back east, start fresh. My land is not for sale. Everything's for sale. Clara, it's just a matter of price. Get off my property," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Morrison stepped forward, but suddenly Samuel was there, hammer in hand, his stance protective. The Harmon brothers twitched toward their guns, but McKenna barked, "Hold." The sheriff looked between Clara and Samuel, something shifting in his expression. "The ladies asked you to leave, Morrison. Best you do it." Morrison's face flushed crimson. "You're siding with them?" "I'm siding with the law," McKenna growled. "And the law says she's within her rights. Now go." Morrison hesitated, then mounted up with a snarl. "This isn't over. When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, don't expect help from decent folks. The men rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving Clara trembling. Samuel's hand steadied her elbow, gentle yet strong. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You stand for me," he said simply. "I stand for you." That night, Clara couldn't bring herself to send him back to the barn. "There's a room off the kitchen," she said hesitantly. "It's empty." "You'd be closer." "If you want." Samuel inclined his head in quiet acceptance. And for the first time since Jacob's death, Clara slept knowing another soul was under her roof, someone who would stand between her and the darkness. The days grew longer as summer deepened, each one bringing new challenges and small victories. Clara and Samuel settled into a rhythm that felt both unfamiliar and strangely natural. He worked from dawn to dusk with quiet intensity, fixing, mending, rebuilding. She tended the garden, kept the hens fed, and cooked meals. Though she noticed that more and more, Samuel found ways to ease her burdens. If the water buckets were full before she reached for them, or the firewood was stacked neatly by the door, she knew he'd risen earlier than she had. One morning she found the chicken coop reinforced with fresh boards she hadn't bought. She frowned, puzzled. "Where did you get the lumber?" she asked. Samuel gave the faintest shrug, avoiding her eyes. Later that week, she caught him repairing a fence with nails that clearly hadn't come from her nearly empty supply bin. "You've been to town," Clara realized aloud. He nodded once. Her heart thudded uneasily. "And what did they say?" "Nothing," he answered simply. Then, after a pause, "Coins I had. Before." Clara opened her mouth to protest. He owed her nothing, least of all his hidden savings. But Samuel's eyes were steady, calm. "For ranch," he said. "For us." The simple word us caught in her chest like a spark on dry tinder. She turned away quickly, pretending to fuss with the kettle. "Very well," she murmured, though her voice was not as steady as she hoped. It was not just the ranch that changed under Samuel's hands. Clara felt the change in herself. She caught herself humming while working, a tune she hadn't sung since Jacob's death. When she rose in the morning, she found she no longer dreaded the day's chores. And at night, sitting across from Samuel at the small table, she sometimes found herself smiling without realizing it. The town, however, was slower to change. Whispers followed her every visit. Morrison's cold gaze lingered too long whenever they crossed paths, and Reverend Blackwood's sermons grew sharper, heavy with fire and brimstone warnings about unnatural unions and heathens among us. Clara had learned to hold her head high, but she felt the weight of those stairs pressing down. One afternoon, she returned from town to find Samuel standing by the gate, eyes scanning the horizon. "Trouble?" she asked. He pointed to fresh tracks in the dust. 3 horses, shod, heavy riders. "Passed here not long," he said. Her stomach tightened. "Morrison's men?" "Maybe." They said nothing more, but that night Clara noticed Samuel kept Jacob's shotgun within easy reach, and he never strayed far from the house. The next morning, Clara woke to find him already at work, splitting wood behind the barn. His shirt hung on a post nearby, leaving his back bare to the rising sun. She froze at the sight, breath caught in her throat. His muscles flexed with each stroke, bronze skin marred by scars old and new. "You're up early," she called, carrying out 2 cups of coffee. He paused, wiping sweat from his brow, and accepted the tin cup with a nod. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the sun climb higher, painting the mountains purple and gold. "Today we fix fence?" Samuel asked finally, gesturing toward the pasture where posts leaned drunkenly. "That would be good," Clara agreed. "Though I should warn you, I'm not much help with the heavy work. Jacob always—" She trailed off, as she often did when memories rose too sharp. Samuel studied her thoughtfully. "You know other things," he said quietly. "Garden, chickens, house, takes two kinds of strength. It was more words than she'd heard from him in one stretch, and she had to blink away sudden tears. He saw her not just her failings, but her strength. They worked side by side through the morning. Samuel dug new post holes while Clara steadied the beams. She found herself anticipating his movements, falling into rhythm with him as though they'd worked together for years. By noon, sweat soaked her dress, and dust clung to her hair. But she felt a strange exhilaration. They rested in the barn's shade, sharing cool water and leftover biscuits. Clara tilted her head back, watching a hawk circle lazily above. "My father would have liked this land," Samuel said suddenly. His voice was soft, almost reverent. "He say land that grows sage and cedar has strong spirit. Was he?" Clara hesitated. "Is he still living?" Samuel's expression shuddered, his jaw tightening. "Gone many winters now. Soldiers came. Said we must move. Father said no. Land sacred where ancestors sleep." His voice broke off, and for a long moment he stared at the dust between his boots. Clara reached out instinctively, laying her hand on his. "I'm sorry." He glanced down at her pale hand covering his darker one. His voice dropped. "You have soft heart," he said. "Danger is in hard world, perhaps," Clara admitted. "But I'd rather have a soft heart than a hard one." He gave a small nod, the faintest ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. By late afternoon, they had finished a long section of fence. Clara straightened, stretching aching muscles, and couldn't help a surge of pride at the sight of the sturdy posts. It had been years since she'd looked at the ranch and seen progress instead of decay as they gathered tools. Samuel suddenly stiffened. His gaze shot to the road, where a rider approached at a gallop. Clara's pulse quickened until she recognized the figure young Tom Bradley, Mrs. Whitford. Tom called as he drew up, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted quickly, nodding politely to Samuel. Clara noticed the gesture small, but more respect than most townsfolk showed. "What is it, Tom?" she asked. He pulled a letter from his jacket. "This came on the stage yesterday. My pa said to bring it to you." He hesitated, glancing nervously at Samuel. "And ma'am, there's talk in town. Morrison's been stirring folks up, saying ugly things. Some men are getting worked up about it." Clara's jaw set. "Let them talk. Just be careful," Tom urged. He mounted again, tipping his hat. "Good day to you, ma'am." "Sir." As the dust from his horse settled, Clara turned the envelope over in her hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, her sister Margaret, from Chicago. With a deep breath, she broke the seal. The words cut like knives. "Dearest Clara, word has reached us of your recent actions. I cannot express how shocked and dismayed we are to hear that you have taken a savage into your home. Mother is beside herself with worry. I implore you to reconsider this madness. Sell the ranch. Come home where you belong. You cannot continue this unnatural existence, playing at being a man, and now consorting with heathens. Think of Jacob's memory. If nothing else, what would he say?" Clara's hands shook as she crumpled the letter. Anger burned hot in her chest. She had endured whispers and stares, but from her own kin? From Margaret, who had never once offered help with the ranch, but now dared to shame her. Samuel watched silently, his gaze steady. Finally, she spoke, her voice bitter. "My sister thinks I should sell the ranch and return to Chicago. Be a proper widow. Pour tea in black silk for the rest of my days. You want this?" Samuel asked quietly. "No," Clara spat. The word came out like fire. "This is my home. Jacob and I built this life together. I won't abandon it just because it's hard, or because people disapprove of my choices." Samuel studied her for a long moment, then said simply, "Not alone now." Her breath caught. She looked at him, sweat-streaked and dusty from their day's labor. and felt something shift inside her chest. "No," she whispered. Not alone. That evening, Clara served supper by lamplight. She found herself telling Samuel stories about Jacob Leiter's stories this time. How he'd been hopeless with chickens, scattering them every time he entered the coop. How he'd cursed and stomped, which only made them worse. How he could gentle the wildest horse with just his voice. Samuel listened quietly, occasionally asking a question that showed he was paying attention. When she asked about his own past, he spoke haltingly of learning to track with his grandfather, of ceremonies by firelight, of a world shrinking each year as settlers pressed farther west. "You speak English well," Clara said at one point. His face darkened. "Mission school. 3 years. They cut hair, forbid language. Beat us if we speak it." His hand touched his chest. "They try to kill the Indian, save the man, but cannot kill what lives here." "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Don't let them." He met her eyes, and something unspoken passed between them, a bond deeper than words, born of grief and survival. In the days that followed, the ranch seemed to breathe again. Fences stood straight. The barn door swung true on its hinges. The garden, freed from weeds, began to sprout green shoots. Even the hens laid more eggs, as though they too felt the change. One afternoon, Clara paused in her weeding, hearing something unusual, a low melodic sound from the barn. She crept closer, trowel in hand, and froze. Samuel was singing. The words were in his own language, the tune haunting, beautiful. The horses stood calm, ears pricked, soothed by the sound. Clara leaned against the doorway, entranced. When he noticed her, he stopped abruptly, almost embarrassed. "That was beautiful," she said softly. "What was it?" "Song for horses," he murmured. "Grandfather's song. Makes them calm. Would you teach me?" She asked impulsively. He looked surprised. "You want to learn?" "Yes." So began Clara's lessons. Simple words of first water, sky, earth. Samuel corrected her gently, his deep voice soft with patience. In return, she helped him with reading, discovering he spoke English far better than he could read it. On the porch one evening, as the sun dipped low and stars blinked awake, Clara found herself laughing at one of his mispronunciations. He smiled, a real smile, and the sight of it warmed her more than the blanket around her shoulders. For the first time in years, Clara felt something she'd thought lost forever: hope. The weeks slipped by, and with them the line between necessity and companionship blurred. What had begun as survival, a widow saving a man from chains, a man repaying her with labor, was becoming something else. Clara felt it in the quiet moments most of all. When Samuel brought in water before she asked. When she caught him repairing a tool long after the sun had set. When his deep, measured voice broke the evening silence with a word or two that stayed with her long after. One evening, Clara sat on the porch, mending a shirt, when Samuel emerged from the barn. He carried Jacob's old saddle, the leather worn but still solid, and set it gently on the porch rail. "Needs oil," he said. Clara smiled faintly. "I'd nearly forgotten about that one." Jacob swore it would last a lifetime. Samuel's eyes softened. "Good leather. Still strong. Just needs care." She looked down at the shirt in her lap. "Seems that's true of most things." Their eyes met, and in that unguarded moment, Clara felt the weight of unspoken words between them. She looked away first, heart beating faster than it should, but not everyone was content to let things settle. Morrison returned, as she'd known he would. It was late afternoon when Clara heard the thunder of hooves again. She was in the garden, Samuel near the barn. The riders came into view, Morrison at their head, flanked by the Harmon brothers. Sheriff McConnell trailed behind, his face tight with unease. "Afternoon, Clara," Morrison said smoothly as he dismounted. His eyes, cold and calculating, flicked toward Samuel. "We've come to check on your welfare. As you can see, I'm well," Clara answered coolly. "You can't blame folks for worrying." "A woman alone with a savagee. His name is Samuel," Clara snapped. "And I'm not alone." Morrison's smile thinned. "You've lost your senses. I've been patient, offered to buy this land at a fair price. But if you're going to endanger yourself and the community—" "The only danger here," Clara interrupted, "is from uninvited guests who think they have a say in how I run my ranch." The Harmon brothers laughed harshly. "Not natural," one muttered. "A white woman taking up with—" Clara's temper flared. "Perhaps you should spend less time gossiping and more time with your Bibles. There's a verse or two about loving thy neighbor." Morrison's face darkened. "Careful, Clara. You're playing a dangerous game." Samuel stepped forward then, silent but unyielding, hammer glinting in the sun. His presence alone shifted the balance. The Harmon brothers' hands twitched near their guns. "Hold." McKenna barked, stepping between them. "The lady's within her rights. She's asked you to leave. Best you do it." Morrison's jaw tightened. He mounted with deliberate slowness. "This isn't over," he promised. "When that savage shows his true nature, and he will, don't come looking for help from decent folks." They rode away in a cloud of dust. Clara's legs felt weak. Samuel's hand steadied her elbow, strong but gentle. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "You stand for me," he said simply. "I stand for you." That night, Clara couldn't bring herself to send him back to the barn. She lingered in the kitchen after supper, turning a cup in her hands. "There's a room off the kitchen," she said at last. "It was meant for—" "Well, it's empty. You'd be closer, if you wanted." Samuel inclined his head, understanding more than her words. And so, for the first time since Jacob's death, Clara slept with the knowledge that another person was under her roof. She drifted off listening to Samuel's low, steady breathing from the small room. And for the first time in years, sleep came without fear. The following days brought quieter trials. Clara received another letter from Margaret, sharper than the first, filled with condemnation and pleas to return to civilization. Clara read it once, then tossed it into the fire without reply. Samuel noticed the tension in her shoulders. "Bad news?" "Family," she said curtly. "They think I've lost my mind." He studied her for a long moment, then asked softly, "You care what they think?" Clara hesitated. "I care." "That they'll never understand." "But no, not enough to change who I am." Samuel nodded slowly. "Good, you strong. They not see, but I see." Her throat tightened at his words. As the ranch improved, Clara began to notice changes in the town as well. Not all were hostile. One morning at Bradley's store, young Tom approached her quietly. "Mrs. Whitford," he said, "I've been thinking about what you said in town, that you saw a man worth saving. I think I see it too. Would Mr. Tallbear teach me about horses? About tracking?" Clara's eyes widened. It was the first time anyone outside the ranch had spoken Samuel's name with respect. "You'll have to ask him yourself," she said gently. When she told Samuel that evening, his eyes softened, though he only said, "We will see." It was late summer when disaster struck, not on their ranch, but at the Garretts to the east. Clara and Samuel had been mending the chicken coop when they saw smoke rising. Without a word, they both ran out. The Garrett's barn was engulfed in flames. People shouted, running with buckets, but the fire roared too strong. "The children!" Martha Garrett screamed. "Emma's still inside." Paul Garrett fought to break free of two men holding him back. "My baby's in there." Before anyone could stop him, Samuel ran straight into the burning barn. Clara's heart stopped. The seconds stretched like hours. Just as the roof began to sag, Samuel emerged from the smoke, carrying little Emma in his arms. His shirt was singed, his skin blackened with soot, but the child was alive, coughing but breathing. Martha sobbed with relief as Samuel placed the girl in her arms. "Scared, but not hurt bad," he said simply. Paul Garrett stood frozen, shame etched across his soot-streaked face. "I was wrong about you," he managed hoarsely. "I'm sorry." Samuel nodded once. Neighbors help neighbors. The words rippled through the crowd, simple but undeniable. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had been Clara's fiercest critic, stepped forward. "Mr. Tallbear," she said stiffly, "what you did today was heroic." A child's voice cut through the murmurs. Emma clung to her mother's skirts and piped, "The nice man saved me?" He came through the smoke like an angel. A hush fell. For once, no one spoke of savages or heathens. They saw only the man who had risked his life without hesitation. That night, as Clara tended Samuel's burns by lamplight, her hands trembled with both fear and gratitude. "You could have died," she whispered. "You would go in for child," Samuel said simply. "I know this." Her throat tightened. "When I saw you run into that fire, I thought I lost you. And her voice broke. Samuel caught her hand in his. "I am here," he said gently. "Not going anywhere." For a long moment they sat in silence, her hand resting in his, the air between them heavy with unspoken truths. A few days later, neighbors gathered for a barn raising at the Garrett farm. Nearly everyone in the valley came. For the first time, Samuel worked openly beside the men of Dry Creek. His strength and knowledge indispensable. By sundown, the frame stood tall and true. Paul Garrett raised his cup of cider. "A toast," he declared, "to Samuel Tallbear, who saved my daughter and worked harder than any 3 men today. Welcome to our community, friend. Here, here." Voices rang out. Cups were raised. Samuel stood stunned, overwhelmed. Clara slipped her hand into his. He squeezed back, drawing courage from her touch. When the crowd called for a speech, he stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Today we build more than barn," he said. "We build understanding. I know some still have doubts, but I am here to work, to help, to be good neighbor. My hand is open to all who will take it." Silence followed. Then old Lars Olsen began to clap. Soon others joined. Not all, but enough. For the first time, Clara dared to believe they might not have to fight this battle alone. The barn raising changed everything. Not overnight, but like water carving a canyon, slow and relentless. A few hands still muttered when Samuel passed in town, but more tipped their hats now. Children ran to greet him when he came with Clara to Bradley's store. Even the preacher, though stiff as ever, toned down his fire and brimstone warnings. For Clara, the shift was both relief and ache. Relief because Samuel was no longer treated like an outlaw on sight. Ache because she saw how little it had taken one act of heroism to prove what she had known from the start, that he was a man worthy of respect. Yet beneath the surface, she sensed danger hadn't passed. Morrison's glare lingered each time they crossed paths. His power rested not only in land and money, but in the resentment he stoked. Clara knew men like him never forgot an insult, and she had dealt him more than one. Late one evening, Clara sat on the porch shelling beans, the crickets chirping in the tall grass. Samuel sat nearby, sharpening Jacob's old axe with slow, steady strokes. The sound of metal on stone was rhythmic, almost calming. "Tomorrow, I ride into town for salt and flour," Clara said. Samuel glanced up. "I go with you." "You don't have to," she began. "Town not safe," he interrupted gently. "For you, yes. For me, maybe not. Together, better?" Clara's lips pressed into a thin line. She wanted to argue, wanted to tell him she could handle herself, but deep down, she knew he was right. The town was changing, but not everyone was ready to accept him. All right, she conceded. Together. The next morning, they rode side by side down the dusty road. Clara noticed the way Samuel scanned the horizon, always alert, every sound registered. He reminded her of a hawk circling above, eyes sharp, nothing escaping his notice. At Bradley's store, Tom greeted them warmly. "Morning, Mrs. Whitford. Mr. Tallbear." He said the name with ease now, as though it belonged naturally among the townsfolk. But as Clara loaded supplies into the wagon, the sound of mocking laughter drifted from across the street. The Harmon brothers lounged outside the saloon, mugs in hand. "Well, looky here," one drawled. "The widow and her savage. Ain't that sweet? Careful, brother," the other smirked. "Might be catching. You cozy up too close, and you'll start howling at the moon." Clara stiffened, but before she could reply, Samuel stepped forward. His posture was calm, his voice even. "I want no trouble." The first Harmon sneered. "Trouble's what you'll get, boy. Sooner or later, folks'll see you for what you are." Tom Bradley appeared in the doorway, fists clenched. "Leave them be," he said sharply. The brothers laughed and swaggered off, but the threat hung in the air like the dust their boots kicked up. "Don't mind them," Tom muttered. "They're cowards. Always have been." Clara forced a smile, but her stomach churned. She saw how Samuel's hand lingered near the knife at his belt long after the men disappeared. That night, a storm rolled across the valley. Rain hammered the roof, wind howled through the trees, and lightning split the sky. Clara sat by the fire, mending clothes, when she noticed Samuel standing by the window, tense as a drawn bow. "You're restless," she observed. "Storm wakes old memories," he admitted quietly. "What kind of memories?" He hesitated, then sat across from her. "Long ago, soldiers came in storm, drove us from our camp. My mother—" He broke off, his voice rough. "She did not survive." Clara's heart ached. She reached across the table, laying her hand over his. His skin was warm, calloused, steady beneath hers. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He looked up, eyes dark with pain and something else, trust. "You listen. Others do not." "Then I'll keep listening," she promised. For a long moment, they sat with only the storm between them. Then Samuel's hand turned, his fingers wrapping gently around hers. Clara's breath caught, and she didn't pull away. The following days were quiet but heavy with tension. Morrison's shadow loomed larger. He had begun sending his men to ride the edges of Clara's land, leaving gates open, spooking the chickens, knocking down fence rails. Nothing serious enough for the sheriff to act, but enough to send a message. One evening, as Clara locked the barn, she found a dead crow nailed to the gatepost. Her blood ran cold. Samuel pulled it free with grim silence. "Warning," he said simply. "From Morrison?" Clara asked. He nodded. Clara's jaw clenched. "Then let him come himself instead of sending cowards in the dark." Samuel's eyes softened. "Danger grows." "But we stand. We stand," Clara echoed, though her voice trembled. That Sunday, Clara decided to attend church despite the whisper she knew would follow. Samuel hesitated, but she insisted. "If we hide, they win," she told him. The congregation fell silent as they walked in together. Reverend Blackwood's voice faltered when he saw them, but he recovered quickly, preaching of forgiveness and neighborly love with unusual fervor. Clara sat tall, Samuel beside her, and dared anyone to challenge their presence. When the service ended, a few turned their backs, but others, Martha Garrett among them, approached with cautious smiles. "Mr. Tallbear," Martha said warmly, "my Emma still talks about the night you saved her. She calls you her hero." Samuel's cheeks darkened, and he inclined his head. Child was brave. The murmurs that followed were different this time. Not all approving, but not all condemning either. Change was coming, however slow. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Clara and Samuel walked the pasture, checking the new fence line. A golden light painted the land in shades of amber and crimson. "You've done more for this ranch in 2 months than I managed in 3 years," Clara said quietly. Samuel shook his head. "You kept it alive. Without you, nothing to save." She stopped, turning to face him. "I thought I'd lost everything when Jacob died. But now—" She trailed off, unsure if she dared finish. He waited patiently, eyes steady on hers. "Now I wonder," she said softly, "if maybe I've found something I didn't know I was looking for." The silence between them deepened, heavy with unspoken truth. Samuel stepped closer, his presence wrapping around her like the warmth of the sun still clinging to the earth. "Clara," he murmured, her name on his lips for the first time. Her breath hitched. His hand rose, hesitated, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was feather-light, reverent Dot, and then, without another word, he leaned down and kissed her Dot. It was not hurried, not desperate, but deep and certain, filled with all the things neither had dared to say. The world seemed to still the wind, the crickets, even the fading sun, as if holding its breath. When they finally parted, Clara's cheeks burned, her heart pounding. Samuel's gaze held hers, steady and unflinching. "No chains now," he whispered. "No," Clara breathed. "No chains." The kiss changed everything and nothing at the same time. Dot, in the days that followed, Clara and Samuel moved through the same routines, feeding chickens, mending fences, tending to the garden, but beneath each ordinary act pulsed the memory of that moment. A glance lingered longer than before. A brush of hands carried unspoken meaning. Even in silence, something new thrummed between them. Fragile but undeniable. Clara found herself smiling without reason, humming as she worked. At night, she lay awake, remembering the warmth of his lips, the way he had said her name. A part of her felt guilty, as though she betrayed Jacob's memory. But another part, stronger and truer, whispered that Jacob would have wanted her to live, not wither in loneliness. Samuel, for his part, seemed more watchful. He still worked tirelessly, still carried himself with the same quiet dignity, but now his gaze sought hers more often. When he spoke her name, it was with a gentleness that melted her fears. Yet, beyond the ranch, the world was far less gentle. Sheriff McKenna rode out one morning, dust clinging to his boots and lines of worry etched deep in his face. Clara met him at the gate, Samuel at her side. "There's talk in town," McKenna said grimly. "Morrison's stirring men up. Claims you've disgraced the valley, Clara. Says Samuel, here is a danger, that he's corrupting you. I can keep the peace in town, but out here? You'd best be ready." Clara's jaw tightened. "We've done nothing wrong," McKenna sighed. "I know it, and some others know it too. But truth don't always matter when men feel their power slipping. Watch yourselves." With that, he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving a storm cloud heavier than any summer squall. Samuel's hand brushed Clara's as they turned back toward the house. "Storm coming," he said quietly. Clara nodded, her throat tight. "Then we'll face it together." The storm broke sooner than expected. 3 nights later, Clara woke to the dogs barking furiously. Samuel was already on his feet, rifle in hand. She followed him to the porch, heart-pounding. In the distance, torches flickered 5, maybe 6 riders approaching fast. "They mean to scare us," Clara whispered. Samuel's voice was calm, steady. Or worse, the riders halted at the fence line. Morrison's voice carried across the night air. "Whitford, send that savage out, and we'll leave your land standing. Keep him, and you'll watch it burn." Clara stepped forward, shotgun in hand, her voice ringing clear. "This is my land, Morrison, and Samuel stays." You want a fight? You'll get one, the Harmon brothers whooped, brandishing rifles. Morrison laughed coldly. So be it. A shot cracked the night, splintering the fence post inches from Samuel's head. The dogs barked madly, horses reared, and the fight began. Gunfire lit the night like lightning. Samuel fired from the porch with calm precision, every shot measured. Clara, breath shaking but steady, returned fire with her shotgun. Bullets tore through the adobe walls, shattering glass, but the house held. Morrison's men. Samuel shouted, pointing. One rider tried to circle behind the barn. Clara fired, the blast scattering him off course, but the Harmon brothers pressed hard, whooping and firing wildly. One shot grazed Samuel's arm, blood streaking down, but he didn't falter. Through the chaos, Clara felt fear and fury surge together. This was her home. She would not let them take it. Then, suddenly, new shots rang out from the ridge. Morrison's men jerked in surprise as bullets struck near their horses. A familiar voice shouted, "Hold fast, Clara." It was Paul Garrett, rifle in hand, with two neighbors beside him. The same community Samuel had helped at the barn raising had come to their aid. Morrison cursed, realizing he was outnumbered. "This isn't over," he bellowed. With a sharp tug of his reins, he and his men wheeled and fled into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the dogs' growls and Clara's ragged breaths. Garrett dismounted, hurrying forward. "You all right?" he asked, eyes scanning Samuel's bleeding arm. "We're fine," Clara said firmly. "Thanks to you," Garrett nodded. "You saved my child. Did you think I'd forget? Morrison's gone too far this time. Folks are tired of his bullying." Clara's shoulders sagged with relief. For the first time, she realized they weren't standing alone anymore. As the neighbors helped secure the property, Clara turned to Samuel, her hands trembling as she wrapped his wound. "You could have been killed," she whispered. His eyes held hers. "So could you." Her voice cracked. "I can't lose you, Samuel." He cupped her cheek with his uninjured hand, thumb brushing her skin tenderly. "You won't," he said simply. The following days were uneasy but quieter. Word spread quickly of the attack and of Morrison's retreat. Some in town still muttered, but more than a few began to view Samuel not as an outsider, but as a man who had stood his ground and earned his place. Clara and Samuel worked, side by side, repairing the damage. Every hammer stroke, every replaced board, felt like defiance proof that they would not be broken. At night, when the work was done, they sat together on the porch, sometimes speaking, sometimes not. One evening, Clara finally gave voice to the question that had haunted her. "Samuel, if you wanted to leave, to find your people, I wouldn't stop you. Do you miss them?" His gaze drifted to the horizon. "Always, but many gone. Land taken. If I go, I find only ghosts." He turned back to her, his eyes steady. "Here, I find life. Here, I find you." Tears pricked Clara's eyes. She reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't just take it, he held it firmly, as though anchoring them both. But Morrison was not finished. Clara knew it the moment she overheard whispers at Bradley's store. He'd gone to Cheyenne, calling in debts and favors, determined to return with more men, more firepower. The valley braced for confrontation. Sheriff McKenna tried to rally support for peace, but the law only stretched so far on the frontier. Much would depend on the people themselves, whether they would stand by Morrison's greed or by the fragile hope Clara and Samuel represented. That night, as the sun set blood red over the mountains, Clara and Samuel stood together at the porch rail. The land stretched before them, scarred but unbroken. "Another storm's coming," Samuel murmured. Clara slipped her hand into his. "Then let it come. We'll weather it. Together." His arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close. And for the first time in years, Clara felt not just courage, but certainty. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. The weeks that followed were heavy with waiting. Every rider on the horizon sent Clara's heart leaping. Every whisper in town carried Morrison's name. The valley lived in a kind of suspended breath, braced for the storm they all knew was coming. Samuel worked with calm determination, his presence steady even as the threat loomed larger. He built stronger shutters for the windows, reinforced the barn doors, and stacked firewood high enough to last through siege or storm. Clara helped where she could, but more than once she found herself simply watching him, his focus. His quiet strength, the way he moved like the land itself, was part of him not at night. When the chores were finished and the world went still, they sat together by the fire. Sometimes Samuel told story snatches of old songs, memories of hunts with his grandfather, fragments of a world that had been nearly erased. Other times, Clara shared her own past, the day Jacob had asked her to marry him, the ache of burying him, the stubborn pride that had kept her from fleeing back east. Each story brought them closer, weaving their lives together like threads in a single cloth. And still, the storm gathered broke at dawn on a cool September morning. Clara woke to the sound of hooves, dozens of them, pounding down the valley road. Samuel was already pulling on his boots, rifle in hand. Clara grabbed the shotgun from beside the door, her pulse hammering. They stepped onto the porch just as the riders came into view. Morrison rode at their head, flanked by hired guns from Cheyenne hard-eyed men with rifles slung across their saddles. The Harmon brothers were there too, their faces twisted with anticipation. Morrison reined in at the gate, his voice booming. "Last chance, Clara. Send the savage out, sell me this land, and you walk away. Refuse, and I burn it to the ground with you in it." Clara lifted her chin, shotgun steady in her hands. "This is my land, Morrison. And Samuel stays. You'll get neither from me." Samuel stepped forward, rifle raised. His voice carried clear and calm. "We want no blood. But if you bring it, we answer." Laughter rippled through Morrison's men. He sneered. "So be it. Burn it down." The first shot cracked the dawn, and the valley erupted into chaos. Bullets whined, splintering wood, shattering glass. Clara fired from the porch, the recoil jarring her shoulder, but she did not falter. Samuel's rifle barked in steady rhythm, each shot deliberate, precise. The attackers fanned out, circling the barn, driving their horses hard. The dogs lunged and snarled, adding to the cacophony. Smoke rose where a torch landed on the fence line, flames licking dry wood. "Clara, water." Samuel shouted. She dashed to the pump, filling buckets, dousing the flames even as bullets whistled past. Fear clawed at her throat, but determination kept her moving. This was her home. She would not let Morrison take it. Through the din, Clara saw Morrison himself, riding hard toward the porch, pistol raised. She froze until a rifle cracked from the ridge. Morrison's hat flew from his head, and his horse reared violently. Paul Garrett and a line of neighbors stood on the ridge, rifles trained on the attackers. "Hold the line," Garrett bellowed. The tide shifted in an instant. Caught between Samuel's steady fire and the neighbors' guns, Morrison's hired men faltered. Two fell, another bolted, and panic rippled through the ranks. Still, Morrison pressed forward, fury twisting his features. He leapt from his horse, charging the porch with pistol in hand. Samuel dropped his rifle, meeting him head-on. The two men clashed in a storm of fists and fury, rolling in the dirt. Morrison fought with desperation, but Samuel's strength was greater, his resolve unbreakable. With a final blow, Morrison sprawled in the dust, gasping. His pistol wrenched away. Clara stood above him, shotgun leveled. Her hands shook, but her voice was steady. "It ends here, Morrison. Leave this valley and don't return." Morrison's eyes burned with hate, but the sound of retreating hooves told him the truth. His men were gone, his power broken. He spat blood into the dust and staggered to his feet. "You'll regret this, Clara," he snarled. "You and your savage both." "Go," Samuel said coldly. Morrison mounted his horse and rode off, a broken shadow of the man who had once controlled the valley. Silence fell, heavy and trembling. The neighbors emerged from the ridge, voices raised in relief. Paul Garrett clasped Samuel's shoulder, his voice firm. "This valley owes you both. Morrison's reign is over." Clara looked around at the faces neighbors who had once whispered against her, now standing beside her. Tears burned her eyes. For the first time, she truly felt they were not alone. That evening, after the fires were doused and the last riders gone, Clara and Samuel sat together on the porch. The land stretched before them, scarred but standing, the sunset painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. "We did it," Clara whispered. Exhaustion in every line of her body. Samuel shook his head gently. "Not just us. Neighbors, too. Community." "Yes," Clara said softly. "But without you, Samuel, none of this would have been possible." He turned to her, his gaze steady. "Clara, when you bought me from chains, I thought you saved me. But now I see you gave me more than freedom. You gave me home." Her breath caught, tears spilling unchecked. "And you gave me life again. You gave me hope when I thought I had none left." For a moment, words failed them both. Then Samuel reached for her hand, his grip strong, certain. "No more chains," he said quietly. "No more chains," Clara echoed, her voice breaking with joy. Weeks later, the valley gathered again, not for a barn raising, not for conflict, but for celebration. Clara and Samuel stood before a circuit preacher in Paul Garrett's parlor, neighbors crowding close. Clara wore a simple blue dress, Samuel a clean shirt. When the vows were spoken, when the preacher declared them husband and wife, the room erupted with cheers and fiddle music. Emma Garrett ran forward with wildflowers clutched in her hands, pressing them into Clara's palms. On the porch that night, stars glittering above, Clara leaned into Samuel's shoulder. "No regrets?" She whispered. "None," he answered, his arm tightening around her. They sat in silence, watching the land stretch vast and unbroken before them. The ranch was scarred, yes, but alive, reborn, and theirs. And in the quiet warmth of that night, Clara knew she had not only saved a man from chains. She had found her partner, her strength, her future. Together, they had weathered the storm. And together, they would face whatever else the frontier had to bring.